Hare Krishna, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namani Namaste Saraswati Deve Guruvani Pucharine Devesesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So I received homework from Sai Tumala, from Shritan Prabhu, and from Dhananjaya Prabhu, and from Samarth Prabhu. So I think we'll start with Sai. And it says, explain the pastime of Gopal Chakravarti. Gopal Chakravarti is a tax collector of Hiranya and Govardhan Majumdara. One day Haridas Thakura said, liberation and extinction of sinful reactions are byproducts of chanting the holy name of the Lord. On hearing this, Gopal Chakravarti got very angry, and he criticized Haridas Thakura. He challenged Haridas Thakura, if one does not get liberation by offenseless chanting, then I will cut off your nose. Haridas Thakura accepted the challenge and said that if one does not get liberation by offenseless chanting, then I will cut off my own nose. After 3 days, Gopal Chakravarti got leprosy and his nose fell off. So Haridas Thakur was not unhappy. It was not unhappy, meaning it was happy with Gopal. Okay, let's have a mistake here, I think. When you say Haridas Thakur was not unhappy, those are two negatives which cancel out, and the statement means Haridas Thakur was happy with Gopal Chakravarti's words. I don't think that is correct, Sai. The Haridas Thakur was not unhappy with Gopal Chakravarti's. I think the statement should be, though Haridas Thakur was unhappy with Gopal Chakravarti's words, Lord Krishna does not tolerate offenses toward pure devotees like Haridas Thakur. So Gopal Chakravarti had to face the disease. Okay, let's see. I'll just double check this. Maybe I'm wrong. It says, Gopal Chakravarti said he became very angry. This is Untitled Chapter 3, text 193. This young man, Gopal Chakravarti, became very angry upon hearing the statements of Haridas Thakur. He immediately criticized him. O assembly of learned scholars, he said, just hear the conclusion of the emotional devotee. After many millions upon millions of births, when one is complete in absolute knowledge, one still may not attain liberation. Yet this man, meaning Haridas Thakur, says that one may attain it simply by the awakening of a glimpse of the holy name. Haridas Thakur said, why are you doubtful? The revealed scriptures say that one can attain liberation simply by a glimpse of offenseless chanting of the holy name. For a devotee who enjoys transcendental bliss of devotional service, liberation is most insignificant. Therefore, pure devotees never desire to achieve liberation. Then Haridas Thakur quotes a verse from the Hari Bhakti Sudodaya 1436, My dear Lord, O Master of the universe, since I have directly seen you, my transcendental bliss has taken the shape of a great ocean. Being situated in that ocean, I now realize all other so-called happiness, including even Brahmananda, to be like the water contained in the hoofprint of a calf. Gopal Chakravarti said, if one is not liberated by Namabhasa, then you may be certain that I shall cut off your nose. Then Haridas Thakur accepted the challenge offered by Gopal Chakravarti. If by Namabhasa liberation is not available, he said, certainly I shall cut off my nose. Okay, so that's the statement that Haridas Thakur made. So what you said here, Sai, is incorrect. When you say Haridas Thakur accepted the challenge and said that if one does not get liberation by offenseless chanting, I will cut off my nose. After 3 days, Gopal Chakravarti got leprosy and his nose fell off. Though Haridas Thakur was not unhappy with Gopal Chakravarti's words. So actually it says here, so it says, although Haridas Thakur, as a Vaishnava, did not take seriously the Brahmana's offense, the Supreme Personality of Godhead could not tolerate it, and thus he made the Brahmana suffer the consequences. So there's a difference, Sai, between saying that Haridas Thakur was not unhappy. So that's a double negative. So it cancels out, and the meaning of that sentence becomes Haridas Thakur was happy. But that's not what is being said here. It says, Haridas Thakur, as a Vaishnava, did not take seriously the Brahmana's offense. So not taking something seriously does not mean that one is happy. It just means that he is not personally offended because he considers the statement a either foolish statement or a childish statement or insignificant statement. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's happy that he was insulted. On the other hand, Krishna was very upset that his pure devotee was offended. So, Haridas Thakur, as a Vaishnava, did not take seriously the Brahmana's offense. That's what you should have said. So Haridas Thakur accepted the challenge and said that if one does not get liberation by offenseless chanting, I will cut off my nose. So after 3 days, Gopal Chakravarti got leprosy and his nose fell off. Though Haridas Thakur was not unhappy with Gopal Chakravarti's words, Lord Krishna does not tolerate offenses towards pure devotees like Haridas Thakur. So what you should have said is, Haridas Thakur did not take seriously the Brahmana's offense. However, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, could not tolerate Gopal Chakravarti's offensive statement against Haridas Thakur, and thus Krishna made the Brahmana Gopal Chakravarti suffer the consequences. A characteristic of a pure devotee is that he excuses any offense by an ignorant rascal. A characteristic of Krishna, however, is that he cannot tolerate blasphemy of his devotee. And in the purport, Prabhupada says, the characteristic of a Vaishnava and the characteristic of the Lord mentioned in this verse are very significant. In his Shiksastaka, number 3, or prayer number 3, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has taught the characteristics of a Vaishnava. Trinadapi sunichena, tarorapi, Trinadapi sunichena, taror eva sahisnuna, amanina manadena kirtaniya sadahari. A Vaishnava strictly follows this principle of being humbler than the grass and more tolerant than a tree, expecting no honor from others, but offering honor to everyone. In this way, a Vaishnava is simply interested in chanting about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and glorifying Him. Haridas Thakur epitomized this foremost order of Vaishnavism. So, see, if you say he was happy that Gopal Chakravarti, with Gopal Chakravarti's words, it's not a fact. He wasn't happy. But as a ideal devotee, he did not take his statements, Gopal Chakravarti's statements, insulting statements, seriously. So that means that he's not happy, he's not unhappy, he's neutral. So neutrality is a major theme when you're talking about a pure devotee. There are two things. A pure devotee, aside from being free from lamentation and material desires, is also practices equality and neutrality. So what does that mean? Equality means the devotee understands that all living entities are part and parcel of Krishna. Therefore, they're all equally have the potential of becoming Krishna conscious. They were all originally Krishna conscious, but they chose to separate themselves from Krishna by misusing their limited freedom of choice. Either you accept Krishna or reject Krishna. So therefore, if someone rejects Krishna, then that doesn't mean they're eternally cursed or damned. At any time, they can surrender to Krishna and go back to Godhead. However, you cannot understand your relationship with Krishna in a body that's lower than a human being. So you have to wait until you come back to the human form of life to be able to exercise your free will and voluntarily choose to serve the Lord, and thus develop pure love of God, and then eventually go back to Godhead. So that is called equality. And then there's neutrality. Neutrality means a devotee is never offended by an insult, or does he become his enemy's enemy? He is always self-controlled. His mind is always focused on serving Krishna. Therefore, he doesn't get angry when people insult him. He's not happy that he's insulted. He's not unhappy that he's insulted. He maintains his neutrality as far as reacting to anything in the material world, so that he can continue engaged in devotional service without any hiatus or any interruption. So Haridas Thakur is on that higher plane of Krishna consciousness, where he's no longer lamenting for something he loses or hankering for something material that he doesn't have. And above that, he always understands the equality of all living beings and neutrality as far as happiness and distress goes in the material world. So he was not happy that Gopal Chakravarti insulted him. He was not unhappy that he was insulted by him. He just clearly maintained his complete faith in scriptural statements, and he left the assembly of the meeting in the house of Raghunath Das Goswami's father and uncle. And it says, a characteristic of a pure devotee is that he excuses any offense by an ignorant rascal. A characteristic of Krishna, however, is that he cannot tolerate the blasphemy of his devotees. So on the other hand, Krishna himself does not tolerate when his devotees are insulted, as Haridas Thakur was insulted seriously by Gopal Chakravarti. And the purport says, Untitled Chapter 3, verse 213, the characteristic of a Vaishnava and the characteristic of the Lord mentioned in this verse are very significant. In his Siksastika, prayer 3, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has taught the characteristic of a Vaishnava. Trinadapi sunichena, tarur iva sahisnuna, amanina manadina kirtaniya sadahari. A Vaishnava strictly follows this principle of being humbler than the grass and more tolerant than a tree, expecting no honor from others, but offering honor to everyone. In this way, a Vaishnava is simply interested in chanting about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and glorifying Him. Haridas Thakur epitomized this foremost order of Vaishnavism. So this is the perfect example of neutrality. He's not expecting any honor from others. He doesn't take their insults seriously, and he offers respect to those that respect him and also to those that don't respect him. Therefore, he becomes what's called Sadahari. He can chant Hare Krishna uninterruptedly in all situations. On the other hand, this purport continues, Krishna, however, cannot tolerate any insults or blasphemy against a Vaishnava. For example, Prahlad Maharaj was chastised by his father, Hiranyakashipu, in so many ways, but although Prahlada tolerated this, Krishna did not. The Lord therefore came in the form of Nrsingadev to kill Hiranyakashipu. Similarly, although Srila Haridasa Thakur tolerated the insult to Gopal Chakravarti, Krishna could not. The Lord immediately punished Gopal Chakravarti by making him suffer from leprosy. Now, leprosy is a very serious disease. It's usually, its symptoms are that one's bodily parts eventually deteriorate, and actually the appendages like fingers and nose and ears and toes and legs and hands, things like that, they fall off the body. They atrophy, and they actually break off from the body and fall away and are lost. And so, therefore, it's a very serious disease, and this is what happened to Gopal Chakravarti, who insulted Haridas Thakur, and his nose fell off. It's a horrible disease. Okay. So, the Lord immediately punished Gopal Chakravarti by making him suffer from leprosy. While instructing Srila Rupa Goswami about the many restrictive rules and regulations for Vaishnavas, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has very vividly described the effects of offenses at the lotus feet of a Vaishnava. Yadi Vaishnava aparada ute hati mahata, Madhya Lila, 19th chapter, 156 verse. Offending or blaspheming a Vaishnava has been described as the greatest offense, and it has been compared to a mad elephant. When a mad elephant enters a garden, it ruins all the creepers, flowers, and trees. Similarly, if a devotee properly executing his devotional service becomes an offender at the lotus feet of his spiritual master or another Vaishnava, his devotional service is spoiled. Okay. Haridas Thakur was unhappy when he heard that the Brahmana Gopal Chakravarti had been attacked by leprosy. Now he's unhappy. Right? He was not unhappy by the insult that he received from Gopal Chakravarti, but he's unhappy when he hears how much Gopal Chakravarti suffered as a result of his offense. Thus, after informing Balaramacharya, the priest of Hiranyamujamadara, he went to Santipura, the home of Advaitacharya. Okay, so this is a little correction of what you said, Sai, and it's to and this is why I wanted you to read this pastime, because there are a lot of subtle points to understand the transcendental position of a pure devotee. So it says in Bhagavad Gita 1854 or 1855, Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma Nasuchati Nakankshati Samaksarvesu Bhutesu Mad Bhaktim Labbate Param. The symptom of a devotee is nasochati nakankshati. That is, that because the devotee is prasanatma, completely self-satisfied by dint of Krishna consciousness, of connection to Krishna and Krishna's devotees, he is never disturbed by the ups and downs of material life. Therefore, nasochati, he does not lament, and nakankshati, he does not hanker or desire material things. So when you lose something material that you're attached to, you lament, and when you gain something that you want, you're elated. But the devotee is neither elated nor lamenting for either losing a material possession or gaining a material possession. Why? Because the devotee is not interested in material possessions. Nadanam na janam na sundarim kavitam va jagadisha kamai mama janmani janmanishware bhavatad bhakti rahaita ki tvai. This is why materialistic people have a very difficult time understanding the behavior of devotees, because they cannot imagine life in which one is not attached to material possessions. Their whole life is spent working like an ass to gain and to control material possessions. So that for them is the supreme, let's say, goal of life. The more you aggregate, or the more you own, the greater your false ego becomes. But the devotee is rather connected not to increasing wealth, but to increasing knowledge and realization of his relationship with Krishna. So that is the real wealth of the devotee, as opposed to material wealth. And this is why materialistic people don't understand devotees. In fact, they think devotees are failures in life. That's their, let's say, the symptom of their ignorance. So Haridas Thakur was like that. He was above lamentation for losing something material, or elation for having obtained something material. And that higher level is the level of equality and neutrality, where he sees all living entities equally as part and parcels of Krishna, and he has neutrality, where he's not disturbed by happiness or distress, honor or dishonor, wealth or poverty, etc. He's above the influence of dualities. Okay, so let's continue with Sai's homework. So, therefore, the statement should be corrected to, though Haridas Thakur did not take Gopal Chakravarti's insult seriously. On the other hand, Lord Krishna does not tolerate offenses toward pure devotees like Haridas Thakur. So Gopal Chakravarti had to face the disease. Okay, that's the end of Sai's homework. Thank you, Sai. And please make that correction. Okay, next is Shritan. And Shritan writes, Gopal Chakravarti, a Brahmana tax collector, challenged Haridas Thakur that the holy name cannot liberate one from the material world. Haridas Thakur, well, no, he, again, see, now you have to be very careful how you write things. It's not that the holy name cannot liberate one from the material world. What Gopal Chakravarti objected against was a statement that the Nambasa stage of chanting the holy name. Now remember I said there are 3 levels of chanting. There is the offensive stage, which is called Nam Aparad stage. Aparad means offense. So it's the stage where you're committing offenses all the time while you're chanting, like being inattentive and desiring material, thinking of material things, and so forth. So Haridas Thakur's statement was that in the second stage, which is called Namabasa, it's what you would compare to the rising of the sun. Right before sunrise, when you actually see the sun, you see the light in the horizon. That's called Namabasa. It's the light of the sun before the sun is visible. And so the second stage is called the reflective stage of chanting Hare Krishna, where when you do commit an offense while chanting, you immediately become aware of it and you stop. So that's called Namabasa. It's the awakening stage where you're becoming conscious, and then you're conscious of committing offenses and you stop doing it. You may not stop completely, but you're aware that it's wrong and you try to not do it again. So Haridas Thakur said, even in this stage, the second stage, where the chanting is not completely free of offenses, one is already liberated. Liberated means not under the complete influence of the modes of material nature and time and old age, disease, and death, of lamentation and hankering and so forth. So you're actually liberated because you are chanting with consciousness, whereas when you're in the first stage you're chanting but without clear consciousness, so you're tolerating committing offenses while chanting, whereas in the second stage you begin to become intolerant of committing offenses, although you commit offenses, but you try and stop yourself from doing it. This is what Gopal Chakravarti objected to. Why? Because being an official, let's say, Brahmana, now it says that he's also a tax collector. So that means he was not a real Brahmana. Brahmanas never work for anybody else. They're completely independent and self-sufficient. So, it says here, Gopal Chakravarti lived in Bengal. His duty as a tax collector was to collect 1,200,000 coins to deposit in the treasury of the emperor. He had handsome bodily features. He had handsome bodily features, and he was learned and youthful, but he could not tolerate the statement that simply By glimpsing the awakening of the Lord's holy name, one can attain liberation. This is Untitled Chapter 3, verse 192. And Prabhupada says, Vaishnavas strictly follow the directions of the Shastras regarding how one can be liberated simply by a slight awakening of pure chanting of the holy name. Well, how do we know that's a Shastric evidence? Evidence? Well, because Haridas Thakur quoted the verse. It says, as the rising sun immediately dissipates all the world's darkness, which is deep like an ocean, so the holy name of the Lord, if chanted once without offenses, dissipates all the reactions of a living being's sinful life. All glories to that holy name of the Lord, which is auspicious for the entire world. Well, this is exactly what Ajamil did. He chanted the holy name, but he was calling his son. He didn't mean Narayana, but he said it without any material desire. He just said it purely. And although he didn't mean Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, by chanting his name, especially at the moment of death, he became purified of all his sins. Now, just as the Yamadutas could not understand this, because they had never been instructed by Yamaraj on this particular point, Gopal Chakravarti Thakur also could not understand the statement that in the second stage of chanting, which is the reflective stage called Nambasa, which is compared to the rising sun, the sun before you can see it, but it's already arisen, so therefore you can see the twilight or the light of the sun without seeing the sun directly. That's called the Namabasa stage, where you become aware of committing offenses while chanting. So, when Haridas Thakur was asked to explain this verse, he said, as the sun begins to rise, even before it is visible, it dissipates the darkness of night. Okay, so you cannot see the sun, but it's already risen on the horizon somewhere, and there is this what you call twilight, and the sky begins to become illuminated. Every morning during Mangalarti, we see this. The darkness of the night begins to dissipate, although we don't see the sun, but it has risen. Therefore, there's this twilight period. And then eventually the sun comes a little higher, and then you actually see it in the horizon. As the sun begins to rise, even before it is visible, it dissipates the darkness of night. With the first glimpse of sunlight, fear of thieves, ghosts, and demons immediately disappears, and when the sun is actually visible, everything is manifest, and everyone begins performing his religious activities and regulative principles. Similarly, so he's making a similitude here. He's comparing the rising of the sun in the horizon to the Namabasa stage, or the reflective stage of chanting Hare Krishna. And he says, similarly, the first hint that offenseless chanting of the Lord's holy name has awakened dissipates the reactions of sinful life immediately, and when one chants the holy name offenselessly, one awakens to service in ecstatic love at the lotus feet of Krishna. Liberation is the insignificant result derived from a glimpse of the awakening of offenseless chanting of the holy name. Now, Gopal Chakravarti was a Brahmana, but he was a Brahmana who was engaged in the service of the Emperor of Bengal at that time, Nawab Hussain Shah, and he was a tax collector. So he was not a really purely functioning Brahmana. A purely functioning Brahmana never accepts to be in the service of somebody else. So if someone says, oh, I work in Microsoft, but I'm a Brahmana, they're not really a Brahmana. They might have been born in a Brahmana family. They might be chanting some Vedic mantras. They might know how to do certain rituals. But a real Brahmana is completely independent, because you cannot speak the truth if you're working for someone. Just like, let's say you are a Vaishnava and you get a job as a school teacher. Well, today as a school teacher, you're forced to accept gender neutrality as a reality. And you're forced to now use certain pronouns of choice of your co-workers. So a co-worker might be a woman, and she can say, you can only address me with the pronoun, the neutral pronoun, it. If you say she or her, I'll be offended. Now, 10 years ago, this was not, it was very clear that there's men and women, and the pronouns are he or she. Nowadays, there are many different pronouns, and the worker will stipulate which pronouns they accept. And if you don't use the right pronoun, you can lose your job. So this is the reality today in the public school system if you want to get a job as a teacher. So the Vaishnava will be forced to accept this gender neutrality. And it means other things also, like little girls can use the boys' bathroom, little boys can use the girls' bathroom if they think their gender is not girl or boy. If the girl thinks she's a boy, then she can use the boys' bathroom. If the boy thinks he's a girl, he can use the girls' bathrooms. So, therefore, the Vaishnava who accepts service, as Gopal Chakravarti did, he accepted service in the government of Nawab Hussain Shah, who was a Muslim. Therefore, he was inhibited in accepting the truth of Vedic Shastra. So when Haridas Thakur quoted the Shastric evidence of Nambasa, the awakening of chanting the holy name purely, he rejected it. And he said, no, this is not true. You can't be free, you can't be liberated by occasionally committing some offense while you're chanting. And then he gave his understanding of the Vedic Shastra. He said, well, first of all, Haridas Thakur gave his proof of the validity of that verse. He said, liberation is the insignificant result derived from a glimpse of the awakening of offenseless chanting of the holy name. And then the next evidence, while dying, Ajamila chanted the holy name of the Lord, intending to call his son Narayana, not intending to chant the name of Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nevertheless, he attained the spiritual world. What then to speak of those who chant the holy name with faith and reverence? This is a verse from Srimad Bhagvatam, 6th canto, 2nd chapter, 49th verse. Then Haridas Thakur continues, liberation, which is unacceptable for a pure devotee, is always offered by Krishna without difficulty. So in other words, Krishna consciousness is way, way above mukti. Most people, especially traditional Hindus, they think, oh, mukti is the supreme goal. But actually, their understanding of mukti is incomplete. Most people think mukti means being elevated after death to the Deva Lokas, like Indra Loka, or even higher planets than that in the material world. But anywhere in the material world, even up to the planet of Lord Brahma, is part of Martya Loka, the world of death. So even on Brahma Loka, where the duration of Lord Brahma is trillions of years, he still dies at one point. And lower than his planet are the Devalokas like Indraloka and Chandraloka and these different places where there are different demigods. They're also subject to birth, death, old age, and disease. Although their duration of life is much, much longer than on the earth, still at one point they die. They get old, they get sick, and so forth. So that type of what you would call short-changed mukti is not real mukti. Real mukti is going back to Vaikuntha, the spiritual world. And even in Vaikuntha, there are different levels of it. The highest level would be Goloka Vrindavan, where Krishna is engaged in his childhood pastimes, or his pastimes in Dwarka, his pastimes in Mathura, in the spiritual world. So, therefore, the understanding of mukti is incomplete as far as traditional Hinduism goes. It's only when a person rises above the influence of sochati and kankshati, lamentation for losing something material, and hankering for something material. Then they attain the stage of equality and neutrality, as I've already explained. That's a higher stage than sochati and kankshati. So he gives the example of Ajamil, who, in a sense, accidentally says the name of Narayana at the moment of death, because he named his son Narayana, his last son, his youngest son. When he was dying, he called out the name of his son, but because Narayana is the name of God, and because he said it without any material desire in his heart, he became purified of all his sins, because the holy name is absolute. Absolute is like fire. If an innocent child sticks their hand in the fire by accident, the fire still burns the hand of the child, because it's an absolute. In the same way, whether you believe in God or you don't believe in God, whether you are a pure devotee or the worst sinner in the world, if you say the name of God at the moment of death, and even though you don't mean God himself, just like Ajamil, he was not thinking of God when he said Narayana, he was thinking of his son, all his sins became purified. And therefore, instead of being taken by the Yamadutas to suffer for all the sins he committed, the agents of Lord Vishnu, or the Vishnu Dutas, came and forbade the Yamadutas of taking him to Yamaraj, and gave him a second chance to become purified. So that's called a second chance. He did not go back to Godhead right away, but he was given a second chance with the knowledge of what happens when a person is sinful and dies. And therefore he became very sober, went to Haridwar, chanted the Gayatri mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, and meditating always on Krishna and his pastimes, he went back to Godhead after some time. So that's called a second chance, due to the fortuitous chanting, or serendipitous chanting of the holy name of the Lord at the moment of death. Whether you do it consciously or unconsciously, the holy name acts, because it's transcendental and absolute. So, for a pure devotee, liberation, such as going to the Devalokas, where the duration of life is very long, where the sense gratification is much more intense and enjoyable than in the lower planets like the earth, that is unacceptable for a devotee, or a pure devotee. And such liberation, what we would call temporal liberation, is desired by materialistically inclined Hindus, but not by devotees. And then Haridas Thakur quotes another verse spoken by Lord Kapila Dev, who's an avatar of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in Srimad Bhagvatam 3:29-13, where Lord Kapila Dev says, "My devotees do not accept salokya, sarshti, sarupya, samipya, or oneness with me, sayuja. even if I offer these liberations in preference to serving me. Yeah, devotees only accept service to Krishna, and they don't accept liberation. They're happy simply serving the Lord, whether in the material world or the spiritual world. So at this point, after Haridas Thakur gives all this evidence of the validity of the statement that one can attain liberation even in the Namabhasa stage, the awakening stage of purely chanting the holy name, Gopal Chakravarti objects. He became angry upon hearing the statements of Haridas Thakur, and he immediately criticized him. And he says, "O assembly of learned scholars, just hear the conclusion of the emotional devotee." So he's thinking that Haridas Thakur is less intelligent. He's speaking from emotion without knowledge. Although Haridas Thakur quoted the Shastra and gave evidence. And he says, and now Gopal Chakravarti is going to give his evidence. He says, after many millions upon millions of births, when one is complete in absolute knowledge, one still may not attain liberation. Yet this man says that one may attain it simply by awakening of a glimpse of the holy name. Okay, so what is his evidence? Well, Vahanam Janmanam Ante Gyanavam Mam Prapadyante Vasudeva Samaramiti Samahatma Sadurlabha. It says, after many, many births and deaths, and we're talking many, we're talking about minimum 8,400,000 births and deaths, traveling through the different species of life until one comes to the stage, one may come to a stage of a pure devotee who is engaged constantly in the devotional service of the Lord, and still, then and only then, when it's a pure devotee with unadulterated devotional service, one can become liberated from the cycle of birth and death completely and go back to Godhead. But simply being liberated from the influence of the modes of material nature, from the fear of birth, death, old age, and disease, from the pitfalls of speculation and material desire, that is not enough to be liberated completely and go back to Godhead. So, this is the statement by Gopal Chakravarti that after many millions upon millions of births, when one is complete in absolute knowledge, one still may not attain liberation. Well, the key word here is absolute knowledge. One may have knowledge, but knowledge alone is not enough for complete liberation. One has to be also engaged actively in devotional service. Now, this is explained in many different places. That is, that knowledge alone is not enough. It's theoretical. One has to put that knowledge into practice, and that's called Bhakti Yoga, pure devotional service with no material desire, but the only preoccupation is to please the Lord, and therefore it's service with love and devotion. So, Gopal Chakravarti didn't understand that. Therefore, being arrogant, he insulted Haridas Thakur. He said his statement is wrong, it's not shastric, it's not the fact. And he put all his emphasis on complete knowledge rather than understanding that knowledge has to be activated, put into action by pure devotional service. And therefore he committed a terrible offense. Okay, so let's go back to this homework by Shritan. And he says, Gopal Chakravarti, a Brahmana tax collector, challenged Haridas Thakur that the holy name cannot liberate one from the material world. That is not exactly the fact. He's saying that even in the awakening stage of chanting the holy name, where there might still be some offenses committed, but one is conscious of it and tries to stop them, one is already liberated. So, the Brahmana tax collector challenged Haridas Thakur that the holy name cannot liberate one from the material world. No, the holy name, the awakening stage of chanting the holy name cannot awaken him, cannot liberate a person from the material world. That's what Gopal Chakravarti said, and that was disproved by Haridas Thakur. Haridas Thakur then replied to him by saying that the reactions of chanting the holy name are liberations and freedom from material desires. He then describes the holy name as the sunlight which dissipates the darkness of the material world and creates auspiciousness. He then related the story of Ajamil, who had been liberated by sincerely chanting the holy name. This is called namabhasa. He then concludes by saying mental speculation cannot possibly by mental speculation one cannot possibly understand Krishna. Gopal Chakravarti then challenged Haridas Thakur that if this was incorrect, then he should cut off his nose. Haridas Thakur fearlessly accepted because he knew the truth and had full faith in Krishna. Okay, anyway, generally what you're saying, Sritan, is correct, but it's better to use the exact language of the verses rather than extrapolate your understanding with different words, because there's a fine line of subtlety here in this scriptural phrases that has to be maintained. So I'll give you an example. When you say that Gopal Chakravarti challenged Haridas Thakur that the holy name cannot liberate one from the material world. Well, that's not exactly what he said. He said, the first hint that offenseless chanting of the Lord's holy name is awakened, and it dissipates, or in other words, the offenseless chanting of the Lord's holy name dissipates the reactions of sinful life immediately. And when one chants the holy name completely offenselessly, one awakens to service in ecstatic love of the lotus feet of Krishna. At that point, liberation is the insignificant result derived from a glimpse of the awakening of offenseless chanting of the holy name. Those are the exact words that should be used. And you can't extrapolate that. Extrapolate that means you reword it according to your understanding. But if your understanding is incomplete, that rewording will be an incorrect statement. That's why it's better to stick to the exact words of the Shastra, and because there's subtleties involved in this understanding of namabhasa, the awakening of chanting the holy name with consciousness of committing offenses. In the first stage of chanting, which is called the offensive stage, nama aparada, one is not so conscious of the offenses that they're committing while chanting. Therefore, they chant and at the same time commit offenses, and are not aware of it. They're not self-aware. But as they become more experienced, they have more knowledge, And through association, they become aware of the offenses that they're committing, and they stop themselves. Okay. So liberation is an insignificant result derived from a glimpse of the awakening of offenseless chanting of the holy name. So there are much higher states of consciousness and experience than simply mukti, because mukti is often misinterpreted as being liberated to the heavenly planets in the material world, such as Indraloka, Chandraloka, and other heavenly planets. But still, there is birth, death, old age, and disease on those planets also. So one is not really liberated, although one seems to feel as if they're liberated because the duration of life is much longer than on the earth. Okay. So, this is why I gave this homework, and I would suggest then the homework for next week is to read the same thing again and revise your homework by not extrapolating your statements, but understanding, by using the exact statements of the Shastra with all the inherent subtleties, so that you get the right understanding yourself. You see, Gopal Chakravarti, although he was a Brahmana, he had the wrong understanding because he wasn't a strict Brahmana. And therefore he committed a terrible offense against Haridas Thakur, and the result was catastrophic. He immediately developed leprosy, but there's going to be a happy ending to this story. That'll be your homework. The second homework is to understand the happy ending by the mercy of Haridas Thakur and Lord Chaitanya to Gopal Chakravarti's tragedy. Okay, so now I didn't look at Samarth's homework or Dhananjaya's homework. Let me take a look at Dhananjaya's homework. Well, he corrected his homework from yesterday, and he gave his new homework. Let's see what he says. By chanting the holy name of the Lord, point 1, by chanting the holy name of the Lord, one is freed from the reactions of all sinful life. Point 2, simply by chanting the holy name of the Lord, a living being is liberated from material bondage. Okay, correct. Wishing to share the true benefit of chanting the holy name, Haridas began to correct these statements. He then begins to quote various scriptures explaining the glory of the holy name. Their main reason to glorify the name is it awakens one to the service in ecstatic love at the lotus feet of Krishna. So this was Gopal Chakravarti's misunderstanding, just being a, let's say, not a fully qualified Brahmana. He thought that simply by gaining knowledge, theoretical knowledge, one would be liberated, but that's not true. One must have theoretical knowledge of the Shastra and the goal of life, but one must also come to the point of pure love and devotion or pure bhakti offered to Krishna or Narayana in order to be liberated completely. So theoretical knowledge is not enough. Even though that theoretical knowledge may be correct, it has to be put into action through practical devotional service to the Lord with love and free of all material hankerings and free of all material misgivings. One must be on the level of equality and neutrality and not be affected by sochati and kankshati, or lamentation and hankering. So, okay. So Haridas Thakur began to correct these statements. He then begins to quote various scriptures explaining the glory of the holy name. The main reason to glorify the name is it awakens one to the service in ecstatic love at the lotus feet of Krishna. That's the main point. When one is in the transcendental position performing devotional service to the Lord, you should say pure devotional service to the Lord, the bond world and reactions to sins are automatically overcome. Liberation is not required, as it will come to your doorstep ready to render you any service. It's verse 192 of Untitled Chapter 3. A young and healthy boy decided that the holy name made liberation seem insignificant and easy. So Gopal Chakravarti could not tolerate this statement by Haridas Thakur. Gopal Chakravarti expounded his views that liberation is a very difficult process taking millions of lifetimes to achieve. Gopal Chakravarti was being very stubborn, thinking liberation and being freed from all reactions to sinful life to be a difficult process. He decided to present a challenge to Haridas. After the whole house heard this challenge, everyone realized the offense made to Haridas Thakur by Gopal Chakravarti and made a loud noise to show their dissatisfaction with his challenge. Gopal Chakravarti was even chastised by the hosts and priests in the assembly, then kicked out of the assembly. 3 days later, we learn he was stricken with leprosy. Okay, very good, Dhananjaya. And then let's see what Samarth wrote. He says, once there was a tax collector whose name was Gopal Chakravarti. His job was to collect 1,200,000 coins to deposit in the treasury of the emperor, the Muslim emperor of Bengal. Gopal Chakravarti was a handsome and young man, but he could not accept the fact that by simply a glimpse of the awakening of the Lord's holy name, one can attain liberation. Gopal Chakravarti tried correcting Haridas Thakur by saying, after many millions upon millions of births, when one is complete in absolute knowledge, one still may not attain liberation. Yeah, because absolute knowledge is good, but it's not enough for liberation. One must also be engaged in a loving devotion of Krishna. One still may not attain liberation. Yet this man, meaning Haridas Thakur, says that one may attain it simply by the awakening of a glimpse of the holy name. Haridas Thakur replied back saying, why are you doubtful? The revealed scriptures say that one can attain liberation simply by a glimpse of offenseless chanting of the holy name. Gopal Chakravarti challenged Haridas Thakur, if one is not liberated by Namabhasa, then you may be certain that I shall cut off your nose. Haridas Thakur accepted this challenge. Everyone in the assembly got up in an angry mood. The Mujammadars, who Gopal Chakravarti stayed with, chastised him. Haridas Thakur forgave the Mujammadars for getting angry at Gopal Chakravarti. Because Gopal Chakravarti challenged Haridas Thakur, who was a pure devotee of the Lord, Krishna punished him by giving leprosy to Gopal Chakravarti. And then second part of the homework, write a summary of Chandkazi's dream. Chandkazi, the local leader or magistrate in charge of Mayapur, Navadvip, during the reign of Nawab Hussain Shah in Bengal. So he was the local Muslim leader, and so the homework is to write a summary of a dream that he has, that he's relating to Lord Chaitanya when they're discussing. And what is Lord Chaitanya's reply about Chandkazi's dream and chanting? And then Chandkazi gives an order never to stop the Sankirtan movement in Navadvip. Once Chandkazi went to a Hindu's house and broke the mridanga and forbade the performance of congregational chanting. Later that night, in Chandkazi's dreams, he saw Lord Nrsimha. Lord Nrsimha jumped on his chest, laughing. Nrsimha Deva said, I shall immediately bifurcate your chest as you broke the mridanga drum. Furthermore, Nrsimha Deva said, if Chandkazi performs these sinful activities again, then he will be killed. Chandkazi actually had the marks of Nrsimha's nails on his heart, or on his chest. Chankazi never spoke about the incident, but one day one of his orderlies, one of his soldiers, said that he tried to stop the congregational chanting and flames struck his face. Furthermore, his beard became burned and there were blisters on his cheeks. Chankazi became afraid and asked his soldier to sit down at home. Chankazi began chanting the holy name of the Lord with the Hindus. Some of the Hindus approached him and said, Nimai Pandita has broken the Hindu religious principles. He has introduced the Sankirtan system of worship, which we never heard of from any scripture. Chankazi confronted Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and spoke nice words. I know that Narayana is the supreme god of the Hindus, and I think that you are the same Narayana. This I feel within my mind. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said that Chankazi was very fortunate because he chanted Hare, Krishna, and Narayana. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu instructed Chankazi to never check Sankirtan and Navadvip Dham. Chankazi accepted this instruction from him. Until today, Sankirtan parties on the streets of Navadvip and Mayapur and in that whole area continue, and people chant the holy name loudly. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, very good, Samart. Okay, so for next week, your homework is to revise your statements made in your answers to homework today by using exact language of Shastric evidence given by Haridas Thakura. And I want to see if you actually understand the subtleties of Haridas Thakura's statements about Nama Basa, the awakening stage of chanting Hare Krishna. And then secondly, to read further on this pastime in Untitled Chapter 3 of Haridas Thakura and Gopal Chakravarti, and find out about the good ending of the story of the pastime, based on the mercy of Haridas Thakur and Lord Chaitanya himself. So you'll have to read, let's see if it's, you're going to have to read to the end of this chapter 3, and there's another pastime explained there, and then later on, let me see where it is. One second. One second. I'm just trying to find where the happy ending comes. It might not be in this in chapter 3. Okay, so you're going to have to find the ending of the story. It's not in chapter 3. You have to go all the way to Okay, I'm going to look this up. We'll stop the class right now. I'll have Dhananjaya send you where you can find the ending of the story. It's in another part of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we'll end right there. So your homework is to revise the homework that you did today by reading much more carefully this past time of Gopal Chakravarti and Haridas Thakur, and then rewrite your homework and include all the subtle points of Nama Bhasa that Haridas Thakur mentions, and use the exact words of the Shastra itself, rather than extrapolating or interpreting in your own words. And then I will give you the second homework. Dhananjaya will send you how you can find the information for the second homework. Thank you very much. All glories to Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.